How many jumps does it take to complete Octo expansion? Octo expansion is filled with 80 levels of pure combat, platforming, and adrenaline. So what is the minimum number of jumps required to beat every single one of them? Before we get started, let's discuss the rules. I define a jump as pressing the B button while in gameplay. This means that if I use a launch pad or hit the end of a wire and gain vertical height without touching the B button, that's all good. But pretty much everything that I do with the B button is banned. It's very situational and doesn't help out a lot, but if I'm able to press and hold the B button, it only counts as one jump. On normal ground, this doesn't do anything, but if I jumped onto a pad, it'll bounce me very high for one super jump. I'm also allowed to use the B button in menus, as that would be stupid if I banned it. To make the editing easier, I'm generally going to cover levels in the order I completed them in. But if there are some really easy levels, then I'll group them together. With all that being said, let's not jump into it. We awake to this beautiful man trying to make out with us before quickly hopping into this area. There are plenty of ramps, inkable walls, and jet streams to collect the key and move into the subway system. A05 Fake Plastic Station is the real tutorial, but since the entire level is flat, I just killed some octolings and moved on without a jump. A06 Bounce With Me Station is very scary and requires several jumps. The whole point of the level is to use these bounce pads. Without pressing the jump button, I can get a little bit of height and bounce up these first couple of platforms, but I'm a little too short to get on this inkable wall, so I have to take my first jump. I can take this splat roller, but then I have to jump once again to get up to this wall. I made one tight bounce to a sponge to avoid a jump, and then jumped once more at the end to finish the level with 3 jumps. A07 was on an inkjet, and thankfully only required you to float around and shoot these spinning targets to finish the level jumpless. CO3/A08 was the first of many easy 8-ball levels. Since the 8-ball can't jump, they rarely require you to jump, and mostly just have you push it downhill or something like that. CO7, CO9, GO9/BO5, and B11 all follow this trend and are easy. Something interesting happened to me in CO9 though. You push the 8-ball onto these tracks, and at the end I was waiting for the ball to fall down, but it never came. I took the ink trail back up and found it just stopped for no reason, so I had to shoot it to get it going again. CO4 and C10 both require you to dodge enemy ink or bowling balls and should have been pretty much exactly the same as a regular walkthrough. But I guess I just like balls too much because I kept running into them and it took me about 10 attempts on each one. During CO4, I had one attempt where I got hit with 0.01 seconds remaining. How is that fair? CO2 is a limited ink stage where there are several intended jumps to save ink. Since I can't jump, I instead had to fall onto this platform and nearly slid off. I then waited to climb to the top and get off. I then spooked this enemy off a cliff with my very threatening demeanor and slid off the edge onto a sponge to save another jump. After some more simple platforming, I finished the level without a single jump. FO4/CO5 was very annoying. I first had to use this bounce pad to super jump up, but then I reached this part. I'm so close to landing on the rail, but I'm not quite there. I feel like this part is doable without another jump, but I've never managed to stick it, so instead I had to finish with 2 jumps. The next set of levels are the ones I like to call stand on a platform and shoot stuff. CO8, BO7, IO3/EO1, GO3, B12, EO6, DO2, HO4, and DO5, all of you stand on an upper platform and shoot some stuff down below to finish the level. Some good examples are Bingo, Space Invaders, and this one that only requires 1 shot. Some of them don't even have guns, like this one where you just walk between 2 switches to beat the level. C11 is a cool stage with a lot of invisible platforms. To know where they are, you shoot ink onto them, meaning you can swim on them, and because of this I figured the level would be easy as I could swim up any walls they throw at me. But about halfway through, I have to dismount this rail, and the only way to do so is to jump. I was able to make some tight drops into ink to avoid jumping, but this gap was too big, so I had to jump again. FO7/C12 and JO2 require you to match an image on the left to a pile of boxes on the right. The first one was a little stressful, as I couldn't climb onto the dog to get a better shot, but I made it out. And JO2 has grapplings to gain height, so they're both easy no jumps. C13 was the first of 4 things that definitely don't make a human-sized blender. Instead, they make a viral post on the gram. JO5/C14 was a level where you grind rails and hit these spinnable targets to make the glow sticks of death get out of your way. The last section was a little tricky as the rulers move very fast, but I got it without jumping in the end. JO6/D11 was a tricky one. If you jump and throw ink, then it'll go more vertical and hit more boxes, which conserves more ink. But I can't do that, so instead I just threw ink horizontally. I ran out of ink destroying the last box, but it didn't matter because I passed the test. JO7 was mostly a simple combat level, but I did figure out something cool. I've always had a hard time with the armored guys. I know you can throw a bomb to distract them, but that's a whole lot of work and usually just try and brute force it. But in this level, I found that with a slosher you can throw up and it'll land on the enemy's head, killing them. It made it a lot easier to finish the level. I'd use a super jump here, but finished level with a single jump. JO8/F11 is the first of 4 main bosses I faced. This one is the samurai, and you do have the option to jump. You are fully capable to move your thumb and press that button, but there is absolutely zero reason to do so. You can't jump over its attacks, and if anything, it slows you down. I dusted the flying dude in JO1 and easily destroyed Octo Stomp in FO1/E12. I don't know why, but they made this fight unnecessarily easy with the outer edge. I thought every fight in the DLC was good except for this one. If you break your shield, then you can just go to the outer edge to heal. If you're low on ink, go to the outer edge. If you want free damage, then go to the outer edge. It wouldn't have been that hard without it, but at least there would have been some challenge, so why add it? But this isn't a rant video, 0 jumps for all 3 levels. F10 is probably the first level where there's really not much to talk about. There were a lot of levels that I completed without jumping and didn't run into any roadblocks, or they just played exactly as intended, so I'm not going to waste your time. FO3, E11, GO8, GO5, GO4/B10, IO6, IO4, IO2, BO3, EO5, HO1/DO3, HO5, and DO4 had little to no interesting talking points, and were all easy no jumps. FO8 is the next station I tackled, and it also goes by the name of Jump Station. You're intended to jump off a bounce pad or rail to get enough height and hit the grappling hook. I shaved off the first jump by bouncing off the pad and just barely hitting the grappling. I couldn't quite reach the next target, so I had to give in and jump to reach it. I again bounced off the pad to just barely hit a grappling hook. I then had a super jump off the rail onto this bounce pad and then jump again off this edge to hit a target. I was in range to hit the next grappling and easily inked all 4 switches to lower this area down. On my first attempt with this level, I was using the normal gun and wasn't able to hit the target without jumping. But the Pro version is also available and has a slightly longer range, and was able to hit the next target without jumping. I then had a super jump to get to the next target. I again thought the final target was out of reach when I played with the normal blaster. But the Pro got the job done and had us finish the level with just 4 jumps. 506, B13, B14, IO8, and JO4 are all similar to the tutorial level. You go around and fight some enemies, but it's all on ground level or close enough where you're never required to jump. FO5 requires you to platform through a level while popping 50 balloons that will float away if you're not quick enough. It's generally one of the more difficult levels, and the addition of no jumping makes it rough. Spread throughout the levels are these ink washers, which you're meant to jump over or use the bounce pads to get around. Since I can't do that, I have to go through them, and often can't avoid them. If I get hit, it breaks my armor and slows me down considerably, meaning I often lost that attempt because I couldn't reach the next set of balloons in time. But I strung it all together after a lot of attempts, and finished without jumping. FO2 was going fine until the end. The whole level is based on pausing time so that you can parkour between platforms. I can freeze these platforms and make it to the end, but the gap here is just too big to swim across, so I have to take a jump. I then got on top of this, and realized that all 3 of these gaps are too big, and I have to take 3 more jumps to finish the level. EO9 features some massive squeegees that you ride around on, and I first have to super jump off this squeegee and off the bounce pad. I then had to embarrassingly jump off this tiny ledge before getting zipped to a bounce pad. There were then 2 more tiny edges that I can't do anything about and had to take 2 whole jumps to cross. I then had to ride a bounce pad on a squeegee and jump once again to reach this rail right here. I lined the squeegees up at the end for a 5-jump finish. FO9 and AO2 were Rainmaker levels that were actually made more difficult. There were several parts of each level where you have an intended skip that would save a lot of time, but you need to jump over water or something to do it. There were also a lot of times where I'd be in enemy ink, and since I couldn't jump to move at a decent speed, I just had to trudge through it at the speed of a sloth in a jar of molasses. But since they gave you 5 minutes, I was able to employ my favorite strategy of brute forcing it. I constantly died until I finally made it to the end, and the game accidentally declared me the winner. E8 has almost nothing to talk about except for this one section where I had to jump out of a rail to attack this guy. C10/EO7 on the other hand has a lot to talk about. You're put in an inkjet, and instead of being a fun combat level, it's almost entirely focused on parkour. Even with the submerge and unsubmerge trick to gain extra height, all 3 of these jumps were impossible without a boost on each one. Then near the end I had to fall all the way down here, which required 3 more boosts. BO6 features this stupid block that you're intended to jump over. I can ink the outer wall if I time a curling bomb just right, but I can never land in it without falling off or dying first. I tried for about a half hour, and maybe if you have perfect timing it might be possible, but I couldn't get it to work. I then had to jump on this bounce pad to throw a curling bomb, and again at the very end to avoid getting impaled by a missile. IO7/GO7 requires you to platform between cars. All of them are inkable, so you can swim between them most of the time, but they get janky. I'm able to ink the first car and swim into it, but the second car is moving too fast to be inked and then boarded, so I had to take my first jump. I got onto the platform and then quickly found myself on a merry-go-round from hell. There's a gunner and a sniper, and not much room to avoid ink on my car, so I'm gonna have to be sneaky. I first inked the side of a car and quickly resubmerged. I then waited until the car came back around and swam to get on it. Despite how easily I did it this time, this is where I fell 99% of the time, as the cars are super slippery and very easy to fall off of. I then waited and took out the sniper before swimming to closer and closer cars until I was at the center. The end of the level just has you ride on one car, so it's free. GO6/AO1 was a relatively simple level where you ride rails and shoot pufferfish to get to the end. When you hit the end of a rail, it gives you a little bit of height, and I was able to use this when the next rail was right in front of me or below me. But these 3 rails were located above me, so I had to use 3 jumps on them. Then at the end of the level, there were 3 rails and a ton of snipers that required me to jump between them 3 times to make it through without dying. IO5/BOA is the level where I might have spent the most time in. You ride rails and have to destroy 30 boxes. You constantly have to switch between rails and jump over these washers, so there's not a whole lot of shape potential. I tried a lot of things out, so here's my personal best. I don't see any way of improving it, so I'm unfortunately going to have to add 18 jumps to the count. IO1/GO1 is the only boss I haven't talked about yet, the Toaster. The first 2 phases of this fight aren't too bad. To get to the top of the Toaster during the first phase, I used this wall to climb. In the next phase, he blocked this off, so instead I just swam across to the other piece of toast and then climbed up that wall. But in the third phase, he armors up his toes so I can no longer swim without falling to the bottom and instead need to take a jump to get to the top. I tried to use a stingray I had picked up to take out the boss, but it didn't seem to work, so I assumed they coded it so it wouldn't. I also found out that even if you take out the tentacle, you can still die in the seconds after. You're completely defenseless as you can't move, but enemies can still shoot you and throw bombs at you. So if you die, all of your progress is lost, and you're out of luck. I thought GO2 was going to require 1 jump for the longest time. All of the enemies are easy to kill except for this sniper. He's just far enough away that you can't reach him with your gun. You're intended to jump onto this platform and shoot him, but instead I can destroy these boxes and find a stingray to finish the job without ever using my legs. DO1/B15 is one of the few levels where you start without a gun or a bomb. This means I have no way to spread ink, and any edge I run into is basically a guaranteed jump. So I had to jump onto this edge here and then again right here. Halfway through the level, I acquired a gun, which made it a lot easier. But I still had to jump 2 more times because the gaps between these sponges were just a little too big. B16 is another 50 balloon challenge, but this time it's a little easier. All the balloons appear somewhere on this platform and there's nothing to dodge. There were a couple of balloons that were high in the air and I could have jumped and gotten, but instead I had to ink the walls and climb to get. This annoyingly caused me to die with 49 out of 50 balloons popped because I was too slow inking and swimming up this pillar. BO1/AO3 is a normal 8-ball level until we reach the stupidest game design I've ever seen. You suddenly have to parkour on metal pipes which can't be inked and require you to jump 5 times to get up just for one stupid key. I then had to jump once again to make it on this seesaw and finish the level. IO9/BO2 is a rails level where you pop balloons and jump way too many times. I was able to shave one jump off by switching rails and jumping over this washer, but I ended the level with a very depressing 15 jumps. BO4 and HO3 are both tower levels where you sit on a tower and do absolutely nothing. I could have tried to kill the octolings, but I just hid in my ink until the level was over and it worked both times. EO3 isn't even interesting, it just has 4 gaps that are just barely too far to fall across. EO4 also sucks, but for much more annoying reasons. It's an 8-ball level, and first requires this jump here. But then after that, I have to jump to get up this smidgen of an edge. Then they introduced this section, which is absolutely terrible and took me more than 5 tries before I was able to reach the end. AO4 is an awful level that shoves me in a plastic ball and forces me to do parkour while under a strict time limit. I immediately had to take 3 jumps across the gaps in between these moving platforms. But I can thankfully climb walls, which allows me to avoid some jumps over here. I then tried for forever to stick this very precise roll onto this wall to just barely stick and climb up. I then got hit off, but managed to stick the landing and get a checkpoint. In the next section, I can roll sideways onto platforms, but if I roll forward, I die, so I had to use another 2 jumps to get across this section, totaling out to 5 for the entire level. D10 was an annoying level because I was doing really well until the end. The first obstacle I faced was this block. You're supposed to jump onto it, but instead I inked this wall behind me and then swam up it and fell down to skip the jump. You're then intended to jump and shoot this grappling hook, but I instead remembered that burst bombs have more range and used those instead. Then in the end there's this stupid section where this bar prevents me from swimming up and instead just hands out concussions. So, to make it onto this platform, I had to jump not once, not twice, but 3 times because of a thin, stupid bar. DO9 is another inkjet level, and there were some cool parts. I used a submerge and unsubmerge trick to get up on the first 2 platforms. I then used submerge momentum to cross this gap and then again for the next gap. Then comes the yellow part, which is tricky because the only way to gain height is to boost with the B button. I skipped the first boost by submerging and unsubmerging, but then I had to jump once here and again here. Then at the end, I had to boost twice to cross this really big gap. HO2 was another ball level, and I was able to roll to the side to avoid jumping on these platforms. But I did have to jump to cross this gap. I had to jump one more time because apparently you can't climb fences and then reach the end of the level. DO6/CO1 is very confusing to navigate and forces you to hop between rails to destroy all the boxes in the time limit. I tried for a while and managed to beat it in just 4 jumps, although 3 might be possible if you were a little better. DO7 forces you to break some more boxes under an extremely tight time limit and is more or less the same as a casual playthrough. I had to jump on this bounce pad here, but besides that, it's a freebie. JO3/DOA is the last station I have to cover because I've been avoiding it the entire time. Girl Power Station is regarded as the hardest level in the Octo expansion for a good reason. It's so hard that adding any amount of extra challenge is like throwing salt in an open wound. The ability to jump isn't a huge deal in this fight, but it still took me a lot of attempts to memorize spawning patterns and finally survive long enough to beat the level. With all 80 levels now complete, I can collect the fourth thing and walk into the most obvious trap I have ever seen. Thankfully, our past self from Splatoon 1 is ready to save the day and we can move on to the escape levels. You start without a gun, which unfortunately means a lot of required jumps. The first coming right here because the gap is just barely too far. I then jumped up this edge and reached the enemy ink section. You're supposed to jump over the ink, but instead I had to trudge through it. Since the enemy takes his sweet old time patrolling, I can clear the first section without being spotted. But the sniper doesn't give nearly enough time. Thankfully, it doesn't matter. I got my shield broken by this guy, but if you walk in a zigzag pattern, you completely confuzzle the sniper AI, and he can't hit you, so you're free to trudge all the way to the next section. I had to jump up this edge before finally escaping to Phase 2. The gap between these ink rails is too far, and I had to jump once right here. I then picked up some explosives and found myself in this area, which sucks. It's completely possible jumpless as every edge is inkable, but getting a bomb ready to ink this fan, then recharging for the next fan, then recharging to ink this wall, all for it to be covered by enemy ink is just really disheartening. After probably 15 minutes of banging my head against the wall, it finally worked and I acquired a gun. In this ink rail section, I again have some problems. I can fall into this ink rail, but then I have to jump onto this ink rail, which is too far away, and then jump a second time onto this platform because it's also just barely too far away. But with that, I killed the sniper and headed into the most terrifying phase, the belly phase. I have to parkour across falling platforms without jumping. I first boarded this platform and then jumped to the next platform, allowing me to fall to my first non-falling platform. I then bit the bullet and jumped down to another non-moving platform. From there, I was just barely able to swim to a falling platform and then to this platform without dying. I was forced to jump another time onto this platform and then again to get off of it. The next section only required me to fall down, which still required one jump. But besides that, I made it down to a key and a checkpoint. From there, I was able to get to this permanent platform without jumping and then got to the final platform without jumping. I now need to gain a lot of height, so I jumped at the earliest one onto this platform and inked the next platform before jumping and just barely missing. I need to save just a little bit of time to get up there. I realized that it was taking a lot of time to ink the wall, so I used the burst bomb special I collected earlier to do that first and then use the 2 jump strats to get up the wall and move on to the final area. In this last section, you're supposed to parkour between platforms to avoid the missiles raining down from above. But since every platform is moving towards the exit and all the missiles can do is break your shield, I just sat in place until I reached the end and could kill the missile guy to move on to Stage 4. Stage 4 is filled with lasers. The first laser I was able to swim underneath, but the second one is a little too low to the ground. The wall turned out to be inkable, so I was able to just swim around this one. The next one is a little higher up, and unfortunately has some of the wall blocked off by this electrical box, causing me to die. But that's just the right wall. The left wall is completely unobstructed, so I was able to get past this obstacle without jumping. The next area is filled with moving lasers, and the first 2 were a piece of cake. The final one seemed like the timing to swim under might be tight, so instead I just inked the wall and avoided it altogether. The next area has moving lasers, and the first one is easy. The second one, on the other hand, is completely impossible. It covers the ground and walls and requires our first jump in this phase. The final one is easy because you're intended to ink the wall and swim above it. The final area annoyingly has these black bars that require you to jump over the first laser. From there I inked the wall to climb over the second one and open the floor. I climbed back over the second obstacle and was able to ink the wall and fall over the first obstacle to save another jump. I was forced to immediately jump again though on the other side 2 times. For the final obstacle, though, I was able to ink the wall and swim around it to fall into this pit and move on to Stage 5. Stage 5 is done entirely in an inkjet, which could be amazing or terrible. I first had to jump once to even get to the inkjet before starting to collect the 8 data points. The first data point was easy, but the second was trickier. You're supposed to stand on this yellow grate and boost off of it to collect it. But I can't do that, and instead swim up here and fell into it, just barely nicking it. I figured out that I can travel between these white edges by inking the sides of it and then submerging to get a little extra height. For the 4th data point, it was a little awkward, and I had to swim above it and then fall down to collect it. And the 6th one unfortunately required a boost to collect. I just barely couldn't get on this black bar, so I had to boost for the second time to get on here before collecting the last 2 data points and moving on to Phase 6, where I played exactly as intended and rode this platform to the end. Phase 7 was just the fight against Agent 3, and since he's a pushover, I quickly found myself in the final turf war. The first 15 bombs are all pretty easy to shoot, and I didn't even need to hop on any rails. Since you have so much time, you can easily find your way to all of them and blow them all up. For the purple heads, I used this rail and actually missed 2 of the 5 bombs, so I had to go back again. But since you have so much time, it doesn't matter, and I started working through the blue ones. There are grapplings located whenever you want to change rails, so I never had to jump in the final fight, and since 3 minutes is way too much time, I finished with 20 seconds left to spare. With the Octo expansion finally complete, and this stupid piece of telephone goo resting in his grave, I can say that my final score for this challenge is 122 jumps. But that's just my final score. This was a fun challenge, and I'd encourage you to go try it, as you'll probably find some skips or tricks to shave off several of those jumps. If you enjoyed watching, then make sure to subscribe and click the video on screen to watch another one of my videos. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.